Hey, good evening, everybody. We welcome you here this evening for the second Science Night Out, and we're very grateful that you're here. I want to talk to you a little bit about what we're planning on doing. So this is going to be a regular series. We'll probably do it a couple of times a year, so look for something in the late winter or the spring for another session out. And our intent here is to bring sort of the science that's going on at the U of O out into the community and have a community-oriented dialogue. And I really am hoping that we're going to make it a night out. So not only will we be focusing on specific topics, but we're going to try and engage in conversation and tell a little bit more of science stories as we go along throughout the evening. So tonight our guest is Lee McIntyre, and I'll be introducing her in just a minute. There's two things that I want to do ahead of time. The first is just to remind you of what the Night Campus is. So the Night Campus is something that President Michael Schill announced just about a little bit more than a year ago. It's a $1 billion new initiative at the University of Oregon, and the intent is really all tied up in what we're doing here this evening, and that's to bring the work that goes on at the university out into the world and to really have an impact. And so to complete what we call the impact cycle, which is to not only do research and then publish it in papers, but turn it into new treatments, new policies, new ways of doing things that are going to change the world. And so one of the exciting things that I've been working on over the last year is to figure out a new building that we're going to have for the Night Campus. It's going to be just on the north side of Franklin Boulevard, right across from the main campus. And so we just unveiled our building plans just about 2 weeks ago, and we made a little video. So I thought we'd start by showing you that video just so you can see what's going on there.
The Night Campus is a way for the University of Oregon to affect the world. And now with these architectural renderings, that vision is becoming a reality.
It works visually, yes, but it also begins to set an identity for this mission, which looks beyond what we've known before in a building.
This building symbolizes an immense amount of ambition to do more and to do more in one great stride.
This design is meant to be something truly innovative, something really different and special, something that will capture the spirit of basic discovery in Oregon and the spirit of wanting to do something for society.
The Night Campus to me symbolizes excitement, the fact that there's a place to nurture these ideas that could really change the way that we see the world.
It's a highly interactive space. The faculty be right there with their students and really energize conversations.
For a lot of us who do work at the boundary between fields, we know that just talking to people is extremely important.
This building will transform our university.
All right, so if the music didn't convince you, we're very excited about this. It's going to be a great thing. Just 2 years from now, you'll see it in its entirety. We'll start breaking ground in February, and then you'll start seeing a giant hole in the ground in the late spring, and then miraculously the buildings will emerge from there. So it's going to be a great addition to Eugene and to the University of Oregon, and we think that it's just the beginning of some of the impacts that we're going to be having as we move forward. So the mission of the Night Campus is science advancing society, and that's really going to be our theme for all of these sessions that we have. So what I wanted to do is start off by just telling a little story. So I'd like to share, as we do these things, just little nuggets of exciting things that are going on in science in the world, and then we'll have our guest speaker, and then following that, then we'll have a chance to have a discussion with the speaker to find out a little bit more about what they're talking about. So the story that I wanted to start telling about, I think it's just one of the most amazing things that has been going on in the world in the last 10 years, and just really over the last couple of years we're finding out. And so this is a cave. It's a dramatic event. So this is a cave in western Siberia, so even more exciting. And this cave is called the Denisovan Cave, and it's called the Denisovan Cave because it's named after a hermit who lived there named Denis. And so it sort of sounds like the beginning of a Monty Python skit. The hermit named Denis lived here, but it actually turns out to be quite a profound location because in 2008, some archaeologists went into this cave and they found something. And the thing they found is not the hand, it's the little bone, this little pinky bone there. Now think of all the detritus that you've gone through as a child, sifting rocks through your fingers. In all of that vastness of the earth and the planet, these guys found this little tiny bone. And this bone, it turns out, is providing profound insights into who we are as humans. And I find this quite remarkable. Okay, and how is that even possible? It's because we can actually, even though this bone is tens of thousands of years old, we can actually extract the DNA from it and then see who is this bone from. And what we found is that the bone is actually from a race of humans, or humanoids, that we didn't even know existed. So this is the only evidence that we have of this group. And so this people is called the Denisovans. And so they are an ancient hominid group, and you probably have heard of the other group that was living around the same time, Neanderthals. So Denisovans lived in the central part of Russia, Neanderthals lived in northern Europe, and then we have what were essentially anatomically modern humans were living in Africa. And then the people that became us moved out of Africa and then moved into Europe and then across Asia and up through here into the New World. And so something remarkable happened. Well, maybe it's not remarkable. I think it's actually perhaps the most normal thing in the world. These individuals had sex. Okay, so this is something that we didn't know until recently, not the sex part, but that it was with Neanderthals. And so the Neanderthals and the humans from Africa were having sex, and we had some inkling of that recently, but also it turns out that some of the humans that encountered the Denisovans also had children, and the Neanderthals also had children with the Denisovans and vice versa. So it's a whole mixed pot of ancestry here. But interestingly, what we have is that people of African descent have no Neanderthal or Denisovan DNA, because that's not where they're from. Europeans have Neanderthal DNA, and then Asians have Denisovans DNA in there, just a little bit. Actually, people in Aboriginal Australians have about 4 or 5% of their DNA is from Denisovans. And so they have the largest part of the world. So that's quite remarkable, I think. And so when we look at the family tree of humans, we see that here are sort of modern humans that came out of Africa, and we see that there's a lot of genetic exchange between them. And so we have Neanderthals and Denisovans all crossing together, okay? And so another remarkable thing about this is that we have a whole race of people that's only known from their DNA and the remnants of their DNA in us, okay? And they're named after a hermit named Denis, which I think is remarkable. And there's some other ancient humans that we see evidence for lurking in the genomes of some of these individuals. So I think over the next few years, we'll keep making more and more discoveries about these ancient individuals. Now, I think this is just fascinating. This is a great science story, but the story is getting richer all the time. And part of that is because we can now sequence modern humans, and then we have the many samples now of Neanderthals in particular, and we can sequence them, and we can ask which genes did they have, and which genes did we inherit and retain as modern humans. And it turns out that when people have started looking at the genes that map onto specific diseases, frequently we find that the variations that lead to an increased likelihood of the disease actually come from the Neanderthals. So these are some diseases that have a greater propensity to occur if you have a Neanderthal variation at those sites in your genome. So things like sensitivity to malnutrition, some heart diseases, and things like depression and addiction to tobacco. So part of who we are, if you're European or Asian, is dependent on who your great ancestors had sex with a long time ago. And I find this quite fascinating. Now, as far as we know, addiction to tobacco in Neanderthals isn't because the Neanderthals were smoking tobacco. That's a New World product. I think they had a preference for cannabis, actually. But this is who we are now as humans. And to some extent, so this is a piece of art called Mr. 4%. So most Europeans have around 2 to 4% Neanderthal DNA in them. And so part of what we are, and this now relates to the rest of the theme that we'll be talking about, is we're kind of a people out of place and out of time. We're evolved and our genes are made for a certain way of living, and society continues to change rapidly. And so things like depression and addictions, response to food and nutrition, the overabundance of food, those kinds of things are all relationships that involve who we are physiologically, biologically, and then our societal context. And so that's an important part of what we're doing. And I think Laura Lee won't be specifically talking about these themes, but I think it's all related to the kind of things that we're talking about. So I just want to share that story because I just think it's amazing that we're discovering this thing from little bones here and there and learning profound things about who we are as humans. So I want to now turn to Laura Lee's talk. The way this is going to work, I'm just putting up this number, is at the end we'll have a chance to do a question and answer period. But we'll do it via text because I'm going to be the one having the discussion. So you'll be texting me your questions. So we'll show this number again at the end. But let me now turn to introducing Laura Lee, and I have her dossier on a piece of paper here, so I want to make sure I don't forget anything. Laura Lee McIntyre is a professor of the School of Psychology in the College of Education at the University of Oregon. She's also the department head for special education and clinical sciences. She's also a member of the Prevention Science Institute, where she's the associate director of the Child and Family Center. And Laura Lee spent her early life in Riverside, California. She's a graduate of La Sierra University and UC Riverside, where she received her PhD. Laura Lee actually began her academic career at Syracuse University, but moved to the University of Oregon in 2009, and we are very happy that she did that. She's won many awards and honors. I won't go over all of them, but she's a fellow and early career award winner from the American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, a fellow of the American Psychological Association, and a recipient of the Fund for Faculty Excellence at the University of Oregon. And perhaps most notably, recently she was appointed to the University of Oregon Board of Trustees by Governor Brown. So that's one thing about Laura Lee is she has great service to the University of Oregon. So as you'll hear, Dr. McIntyre's work is really distinguished not only for her care and attention that she pays to children with disabilities, but also the recognition that of the challenges that are faced by families. And I know many people in this audience are facing those challenges. And so not only it's the attention to children, but the broader support systems and how we should be approaching all of these disabilities in order to make the lives of the children and their families the best lives that they can be. And so with that, I invite you to welcome Laura Lee McIntyre to the stage. Thanks.
I remember many, many Thanksgiving dinners growing up. I could smell my mother's cooking wafting through the house. And everything about the holidays, this is actually a perfect time to have this talk, everything about the holidays was magical. The family, the friends, the good times, the opportunities to get together and share those simple moments that we can all be thankful for. Those things that were so special to me were a challenge for my cousin. The holidays were not for Mindy. all of the things that I cherish, the opportunities to engage socially, to enjoy new foods. We didn't eat turkey and dressing and cranberry sauce every day. The new foods, those were a challenge for my cousin. The novel environments, the opportunities to flex her social communication skills, which were underdeveloped, was a challenge. Sometimes Mindy would just sit in a corner and sort of keep to herself, and other times she would have excruciating meltdowns, and that just broke my heart, and I knew it was difficult for my aunt and uncle. I became interested in developmental disabilities before I even knew what developmental disabilities were. But of course, now I know that autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder, a brain disorder that affects 1 in 68 children. Those children grow up to be adults. Those adults are in our community, sometimes attending our colleges and universities, living next door to us in our neighborhoods. I noticed the challenges very early on because of my cousin. And that really put me on a path to really investigate the family experiences and the experiences of people with disabilities. And I didn't know that at the time, but I was really compelled to pursue that on a scientific level. Of course, I know that autism is a social communication disability marked by deficits in communication. Social skills don't often come easily or naturally for these individuals, but it's often the problem behaviors, the challenging behaviors that can be so debilitating, that can interfere with these children's ability to be included in regular education settings, to be included on the playground, to be included at the lunch table, to be included on play dates, to be included, period, full stop. It's these behavior problems that can also be so stressful to parents, to caregivers, and I saw this with my aunt and uncle, the ups and downs, the emotional kind of heartbreak that they experienced, and we as a family experienced. Of course, some children's problem behaviors are extreme, and after I received my PhD, I took a postdoc at the Kennedy Krieger Institute at Johns Hopkins University, and I was on an inpatient unit, the neurobehavioral unit, and in this 16-bed hospital unit, we were charged with the treatment of severe challenging behaviors. And I remember one little girl that came to us with a detached retina because she had engaged in such challenging problem behavior. Now, fortunately, not all children engage in such high levels of challenging behavior, but that shit is real, people. It happens. We know that children with autism and other developmental disabilities are 3 to 5 times more likely to develop illness. I cut out over here. That's interesting. I'm going to modify my behavior and stay right here. These children are 3 to 5 times more likely to develop a psychiatric illness or a severe challenging behavior relative to their typically developing counterparts. And epidemiological studies suggest that the onset is sometime in adolescence and that transition to adulthood. However, we as people in the field, as caregivers, as people interested in this, know that those problems can emerge much, much earlier than adolescence and much, much earlier than the transition to adulthood, although that might be a particularly tumultuous time and changes developmentally and so on that could exacerbate some of these existing behavioral problems. But we know these problems occur earlier. This graph here shows a sample of 200 children who were 3 years old. Now, I have 2 kids. They're older than 3. But I can remember when they were 3, not too long ago. 3-year-old children have behavior problems. We call it the terrible 2s and 3s for a reason. But relative to typically developing children with developmental delays already at age 3 are demonstrating more behavior problems. So here we see an elevation in total problem behaviors, an elevation in internalizing behaviors. So these are things like anxiety and depression, and this is in 3-year-old children. And we also see elevations in externalizing behavior, so the aggression, the disruption, the tantrums, the major outbursts. And these are the things that interfere with one's ability to really access that quality of life that we're all after. I went to graduate school thinking that I wanted to be a teacher. I was going to be a special education teacher, and I was going to work with children one-on-one and make a difference that way. I got bit by the research bug, and I got bit hard, and I have the mark to show for it. I fell in love with making an impact on a different level. So rather than working with individual children, one-on-one or in a classroom context, I was really interested in examining, kind of from a broader perspective, the family experiences and the developmental onset of some of these behavioral problems that I had observed in Mindy, my cousin, and had observed sort of vicariously through listening and talking to my aunt and uncle. So I worked with Bruce Baker at UCLA and Keith Cernick at Penn State and Jan Blatcher at UC Riverside and Frank Gresham at UC Riverside, and I was part of a multi-site study that actually tracked the onset of some of these behavior problems in very young children, with an eye toward looking at family processes and family systems that may be implicated in the development of some of these adaptive behaviors as well as some of the maladaptive behaviors that I spoke of. When I first started out my academic career, so Patrick told you, I was at another university before I came to Oregon, although my blood is green and yellow, I'm pretty sure. But when I first started this line of work, I wanted to develop interventions to promote the well-being of family members specifically, and to promote behavioral health and well-being of children. And I scoured the literature and I looked for things that were evidence-based, and I actually didn't find too many things focused on families of children with developmental disabilities. I had a colleague at the University of Washington, Carolyn Webster Stratton, who had developed a program called the Incredible Years Parent Training Series, very well-researched, evidence-based program for treating conduct disorder. Now you might say, well, what does conduct disorder have to do with autism? Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure if I have the answer, actually. But children with autism and other developmental disabilities are at increased risk for developing some of the same behavior problems. So I set to refine, modify, tailor, and test the Incredible Years Parent Training Program that I had developed for parents with developmental disabilities. And when I started out, I had a team of 4 people. I had 4 remarkable, very strong women who worked side by side with me, making the modifications and testing out the interventions. And let me tell you a little bit about these students because they're remarkable. They've all graduated and gone on to their own research careers. Nicole Quintero is a faculty member at Rush Medical University. Florence DeGennaro-Reed is a faculty member at the University of Kansas. Leah Wildinger-Welkons is chief psychologist at the Kelberman Autism Center. And Leah Briszkiewicz-Fineff, try to say that 10 times fast. I can't. Glad I said it once. Leah Briszkiewicz-Fineff is a faculty member at SUNY Upstate Medical University. These 4 remarkable women rolled up their sleeves and worked with me to develop the modifications to this program. Let me tell you a little bit about the program. It's not rocket science. Actually, if it were rocket science, I probably wouldn't be in this line of work. But it was an intervention focused on parenting. So my idea was that a magical ingredient that promotes optimal behavioral health is the parent-child relationship. And that's not a new idea, and I can't claim to sort of take ownership of that idea. But the idea that parent-child relationships matter really speaks to me as a teacher, as an early interventionist. Parent-child relationships matter. Relationships with early intervention providers matter. Anyone who has that tried and true babysitter that they rely on, and hopefully she's taking good care of my kids right now, we know that that relationship matters. And so really the target of the intervention is on improving the relationship, the parent-child relationship. And we do this through focusing on positive parenting strategies, reducing some of the negative coercive strategies, teaching positive discipline. And that sounds like good parenting, right? And we made modifications to focus specifically on the needs of kids with autism and other developmental disabilities. Thinking about their communication styles, thinking about taking opportunities to teach through play, thinking about the function or the communicative intent of the challenging behavior. So rather than trying to suppress a behavior, we really sought to understand why that behavior continues to occur. What is reinforcing about that behavior, rather than just suppressing it? We tested this intervention in a randomized controlled trial. And we collected information from parents in their home settings. We got surveys. We did videotaped observations. And actually, this was a few years ago when we didn't have these tiny digital cameras and we didn't have video recording on our phones. So literally, my research assistants hoisted a camcorder. Remember, it's not too long ago, hoisted a camcorder on their shoulder and took these videotaped observations of parents interacting with their children in naturalistic family contexts. And what we found was that relative to our control condition received sort of treatment as usual, intervention and services in the community as usual. We found that our intervention group, so our interventions were comprised of 8 to 12 caregivers that met weekly for 12 weeks. We followed this curriculum that I described. We saw noticeable reductions in these observations, and we coded 30-second partial interval codes looking at the presence or absence of particular behaviors. And we noted what we're calling less effective or ineffective parenting strategies relative to more optimal or positive parenting strategies. So we see nice reductions in our treatment condition. Now, what's really striking about this is we had naive observers code, not naive like not knowledgeable, but naive blind to condition. The research assistants didn't know who was in the treatment condition, and they didn't know who was in the control condition. They didn't know if it was pre or post intervention. So it provides a more rigorous or more valid test of treatment effectiveness. You might be thinking, well, that's great. Parents are changing their parenting strategies. But aren't you interested in reducing challenging behavior among the children? The hypothesis was parent-child relationships were actually the mechanism or implicated in sort of the development of more adaptive and less adaptive strategies. So ultimately, we were interested in modifying child problem behavior. And what we see here is a similar pattern. So relative to our control condition, the children who were in our treatment condition, and mind you, the children did not receive any intervention themselves. The intervention was targeting parents and the parent-child relationship. The children showed fewer problem behaviors post-intervention, and this is a significant group-by-time interaction. Now, we were very excited about these results. They were fairly revolutionary at the time. There are other people doing this work now, but at the time it was brand new. Finding that sort of kept me up at night was that we were able to change parent-child interactions, improve the effectiveness of the parent-child interactions, indeed improve the child problem behaviors, but we couldn't touch parenting stress. Anyone who's a parent knows parenting is stressful, right? It's not for everyone. Anyone can be a parent. It's not for everyone. We couldn't touch parenting stress. So we measured stress, we measured maternal depression, and we could not intervene and reduce heightened stress parents were reporting. I don't like this microphone. I didn't like that finding. And so I got to thinking, well, why is it that we can't reduce parenting stress? Well, we didn't target parenting stress. We targeted parent-child relationships. And the idea was that if we improved child behavior, that parents would feel less stressed. But that actually didn't pan out in our data. So I scratched my head, went back to the drawing board, and started working with a colleague of mine in Southern California, Dr. Cameron Neese, who's an expert on stress reduction. And she has been running mindfulness-based stress reduction interventions for parents of children with autism and other developmental disabilities for a number of years. And we got together and we wrote a grant application, and the idea behind this proposal was that if we could target directly, that parents might be better able to uptake the intervention, the behavioral skills training intervention. So first we target the stress, then we improve the parenting, and we see the collateral effects on child behavior, right? Seemed great. NIH liked it. We're very excited about this idea. First, we target the stress. And Our preliminary work does demonstrate that when parents of children with autism and other developmental disabilities receive a mindfulness-based stress reduction, so this is a 6-week intervention to reduce stress by increasing one's mindful awareness of their time and space, to increase their acceptance, and to sort of accept and engage in self-love and accept their child. It's not a targeted intervention that focuses on the children at all. It is simply designed to increase mindful awareness, reduce emotional reactivity, and indeed we see nice reductions on parents' reports of stress and depression. So here we see relative to a control group, and the control group are parents of children with autism and other developmental disabilities. Those in our treatment condition report less stress and less depression after receiving this mindfulness-based stress reduction. Now, we're very excited about layering on several different interventions to optimize parenting, improve mental health for caregivers as well as for children themselves. Now, my lab has grown over the years, so I mentioned those 4-star doctoral students. Now I have 18-star doctoral students, and I hope some of you are in this room. I can't see you, so when I see you on Friday at DocSam, you can just say that you were there. Start texting your friends right now. There will be a quiz. I now have 18 doctoral students, and what we're able to do with such a large team is really engage in community-based interventions that involve a large group of people power, for lack of a better word. So I have wonderful graduate assistants who are assisting me with this research in every step of the way. I also have wonderful colleagues, and I see one of them in the front row there, hello, Beth Stormshack, who have really challenged my thinking, and I think this is what good colleagues do. You challenge your thinking, you challenge approaches, and in sort of collaborative laboratories, you're able to sort of riff off of one another and hopefully riff with one another. And so in thinking about refining intervention approaches, designing interventions that are both feasible and cost-effective and can be used with a range of families, including those with autism and other developmental disabilities, I've had an opportunity to work with the Family Checkup. Beth Stormshack and Tom Deshawn developed the Family Checkup, which is a strength-based intervention that's brief. So this is the beauty of it. It's a brief intervention, and it's tailored to family strengths and priorities and needs. Right now we're up, well, not right now we're here in Eugene, but we're up in the Portland area in 5 elementary schools in the North Clackamas School District. And we are recruiting incoming kindergarten students and using the Family Checkup, making some modifications to this intervention approach for families who have children with autism and other developmental disabilities. Many of these children are in general education classrooms, and teachers are struggling with how to best support them. What we're seeing here with some of our findings is that although the intervention itself focuses on parents, this is a parenting, a family-centered intervention, teachers who are also blind to conditions, so similar to my other work where individual coders are sort of blind to treatment condition, teachers are reporting fewer emotional and behavioral problems in those parents of children who receive the Family Checkup, our intervention, relative to our control group. So we're developing a substantial body of work demonstrating that when we intervene with families, when we focus on parenting, not only do we see collateral effects across different behaviors and contexts and settings, but teachers are reporting that children are doing better in school. This slide shows behavioral and emotional symptoms, but we see similar findings for academic outcomes. You all know that if you're not doing so well emotionally and behaviorally, it's hard to focus on anything else. And so we're seeing nice associations with emotional and behavioral health with academic performance, things that teachers care about, things that principals and school districts and policymakers care about. They care about test scores, they care about achievement. And any kids probably care about their own children's achievement. Now we're developing this substantial body of evidence suggesting that interventions are working. But our interventions are only as good as our ability to detect who may be at risk or who may be in need of these interventions. So I'm going to take sort of a slight left turn here and think about how we identify children in need of support, be it because they have a developmental risk factor or another risk factor. How do we best identify who might be in need? And I have to talk a little bit about the good work coming out of the College of Education. So my colleagues Jane and Diane Bricker developed the Ages and Stages Questionnaire. If you have a child who has seen a primary care physician in the state of Oregon, chances are you filled out an Ages and Stages Questionnaire. This developmental screener is ubiquitous. When I was in New York, I was filling out Ages and Stages questionnaires. It's not just an Oregon thing. It's been translated into many languages. It's used across the globe, but it's really saturated in developmental and primary care pediatrician's office here in the state of Oregon. It's a wonderful measure. It's a self-report. Parents report on their child's development. Are great. However, self-reports rely on parents' ability to articulate the needs and concerns that they have about their children. And self-reports are reliant on having physicians or other caregivers listen and receive, digest, and process that information. You can imagine that there are a number of implicit and explicit biases that are present in the medical system. I see Randy Phelps out there, developmental pediatrician at the CDRC. He does lots of comprehensive evaluations. If your child sees Randy Phelps, your child will have a good comprehensive evaluation. So Dr. Phelps does not have any of these implicit and explicit biases, I promise. However, if you're human like I am, you may have some of these implicit and explicit biases. So if a physician might say, oh, this is a girl. Girls don't have autism. This is a disorder in boys. Boys are 4 to 8 times more likely to have autism. That doesn't mean that only boys have autism. Or this is a person whose first language is not English. Or this is a person from an impoverished background. Or this is a person who doesn't have access to primary care. You name it. The list goes on and on. So there may be social, cultural, political factors that interfere with our ability to detect developmental differences. What if we could identify ways that didn't rely on parents' self-report, that didn't rely on physicians' evaluations or appraisals? And I'm not suggesting we work Dr. Phelps out of a job. You will always have a job, Randy. But what if we were able to detect differences before we even saw social communication difficulties? My present work involves a collaboration with Fred Sabb, who's the director of the Lewis Center for Neuroimaging here at the U of O, and Damien Fair, who's a neuroscientist up at OHSU. And we're evaluating networks in the brain that may show differences in brain functioning. So we are looking at fMRI resting state networks to determine whether there are differences in some of these networks that have been relatively well explored in typically developing children and adults and under-investigated in more vulnerable clinical populations like those children with autism and developmental delays. So here, this graphic just shows that there are a number of different ways toward developing a model of shared and disparate neurobiological etiology. So we're interested in determining whether there are some clues as to what causes or what are the underlying causes that are implicated in things like autism or other neurobiological, neurodevelopmental disorders. So here at the brain level, we're looking at different functional connectivity resting state networks. At the behavioral level, of course, we look at sort of our behavioral phenotypes, internalizing and externalizing. And of course, we're interested, I'm in a college of education, I'm interested in school performance, I'm interested in outcomes. But here, if we look sort of at the brain level, we may potentially have clues as to brain signatures that may vary across different diagnostic subgroups. At the gene expression level, there are a number of people, several colleagues up at OHSU, that are attempting to identify candidate genes implicated in the etiology of autism. So this just shows kind of a graphic of the varying levels of scientific inquiry. And my point here is that we need all hands on deck. So as we think about addressing a complex problem like autism, causes, treatments, supports, we need investigation at every level of scientific inquiry. And my little plug for the Night Campus is that we actually could develop a space where all levels of scientific inquiry are coordinated, and that the strengths of a certain disciplinary area can magnify the strengths of another disciplinary area, such that we could do more than we could in our individual labs. It's very Gestalt. The sum is greater, the whole is greater than the sum of our parts. I'd like to end with a very promising study that has the potential to revolutionize our knowledge of autism. So, colleagues at OHSU, but actually indeed colleagues from across the country, are engaged in the largest study of autism that has ever been conducted. So the study is called SPARK. Goal is funded by the Simons Foundation, and the goal is to recruit 50,000 trios. What's a trio? An individual with autism and their biological mother and father, to understand both at a genetic level, gene expression, at a clinical level, behavior, and attempting to understand genes that are related to the wide heterogeneity of phenotypic expression. What does that mean? Well, in autism, it's a spectrum disorder, and we recognize that children and adults can be very low functioning and have significant levels of intellectual impairment, be very high functioning and demonstrate high IQ, be gifted, and have sort of intact or enhanced cognitive functioning. It is a very heterogeneous neurodevelopmental disorder. And so the goal here is to understand at a basic genetic level how we account for this phenotypic heterogeneity and to identify specific genes that may be implicated in the disorder. We know genes are involved, we just don't know which ones. We have some clues. There are 22 sites across the country, and we have an Oregon site that's being led by Brian O'Rourke, who's a geneticist, and Eric Fombone, who's an epidemiologist and a child psychiatrist. And the goal is to combine forces and put together a repository of information, of data, that can then be used for further study to help elucidate both the causes as well as the potential interventions, so that we can detect very early on who may be at risk, course correct, and better understand the underlying cause. I've thought for a long time that we don't have autism spectrum disorder, that we have autism spectrum disorders. It is likely a number of different causes that result in this heterogeneity. So it's a very exciting time, and I feel like we're at the tip of the iceberg in terms of our knowledge burgeoning, and hopefully in a few years, with more scientists focusing on complex questions and asking questions that they in their labs aren't able to ask in isolation, but really combining forces that will have much more information. I'd like to end by acknowledging people that have influenced my work, and certainly my cousin Mindy has been an inspiration before I even really started on this journey. But colleagues that I've worked with over the years, funding institutes, graduate students, many of my colleagues who are here tonight, but my family and also the families that I've worked with over the years, hundreds and hundreds of families in my career. And everyone has to be inspired, I think, find their own inspiration. And my inspiration really comes from my family, and I'm lucky enough to have my own crew of superheroes at home. I think everybody's got to have a Batman in their life, everyone's got to have a Captain America, and everybody's got to have a pirate. So I really like to acknowledge my crew of superheroes, number one superheroes in the front row here. And my kids are a constant inspiration. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Laura Lee. We're going to have a chance to have a little discussion to follow up on some of these themes that Laura Lee just started off, but we're going to set the stage here to do that. And so just to remind you, if you have questions, we're a very modern organization here, and so please feel free to send me a text if you want to join in on the discussion, and I'll try not to be too millennial, sort of like checking other parts of my phone.
I need some eye contact.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
I lack that in my world.
That's good. So let me just kick off this discussion by asking you, I think, a question that's really in the news all the time, and that is, is the prevalence of autism really rising the way that people seem to be thinking, or is it just our diagnosis is getting better? Is this really an epidemic that we're facing?
I think that's a great question. So, yes and maybe. That's my short answer. So we certainly are identifying more and more people with autism. The diagnostic criteria have changed over the years. We now consider autism to be more than just a narrowly defined autistic disorder, which was oftentimes associated with intellectual disability and very narrowly defined. And our diagnostic taxonomies have changed, our diagnostic manuals have changed to broaden the scope of the definition. Now, if definition changes were all that we're changing, I think that's going to account for some of the increase in prevalence, but probably not all of it. We know that genes are implicated in the disorder, and we have some clues as to potential risk factors. So a number of studies have come out in the recent last couple, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, suggesting that paternal age, advanced paternal age is a risk factor, potentially due to genetic mutations associated with de novo mutations, so new mutations that are expressed in male sperm. And so certainly many people are waiting to have babies until they're a bit older, and so we see advanced age potentially accounting for some of that increased prevalence. We want to be careful to sort of differentiate between risk and advanced parental or paternal or maternal age being a risk factor, but not necessarily being a cause. There may be other risk factors, so there may be sort of gene by environment interactions. And without knowing sort of the specific genetic mechanisms at play, we can't fully understand the gene by environment interactions. But certainly, our environment is different. We know that our environment is different now than our environment was 50 years ago and 100 years ago. So there's a lot of moving parts, and I think that's a really complicated, a really important question, a really complicated question. So we are seeing more cases being identified. Our diagnostic sort of ability to detect developmental differences early, autism is becoming more of a household name. You can't say the word autism and sort of be faced with a blank-looking face. Most people have some, sort of pop psychology, culture, understanding of what autism is. And so I think because it's receiving more recognition, more press, our training for professionals who engage in these sort of developmental screening, diagnostic assessments has become better. Our tools are becoming sharper for identifying differential diagnosis. All of those things help us identify more children, but I don't think it explains everything.
So a follow-on that topic from the audience is there evidence that the autism rates are a lot higher in the United States? And if they are, why might that be? And is that actually a clue to some of the things you were just discussing?
Well, I think that's a great question. We don't have a lot of international epidemiological studies conducted. So there's a couple of studies, one in Japan, one in Europe, the Netherlands, but we don't have we don't have the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, for example, in every country. So we have better epidemiological studies and ongoing kind of repeated studies, developmental surveillance studies set up through the CDC. And so I think we have more information about the United States, information that's not available in other countries. So really my answer is I'm not sure. I'm not an epidemiologist, and actually if Eric Fonbaum was here, he'd probably give you some wonderful answer with a French accent. But I think we don't have the sophisticated studies that would allow us to answer those questions with the type of certainty that I would feel comfortable sort of saying on stage and on video.
So that's good, yes. This is being recorded for everyone else to enjoy in the future as well. And I think another question from the audience that I think is probably right at the top of everyone's list is, what are the most promising treatments right now for autism, especially non-pharmaceutical ones, if people are interested in that? You talked a lot about these interventions, and so how's that going?
So I think the nature of our interventions thus far is that we're treating the symptoms, we're not treating the core deficits. So we can ameliorate or reduce some of the symptoms, the behavioral symptoms, we can improve social and communication skills, but we're not treating the core, the sort of the elusive core deficits are very difficult to treat. But I would say our most promising interventions are those developmental and behavioral approaches that rely on presenting information to learners in a very clear and salient way, providing immediate feedback over a series of repetitions, embedding learning throughout environments at home and school, identifying sort of targets in a very comprehensive way, interventions that focus on adaptive behavior and improving social and communication. So these would be interventions potentially delivered by speech and language pathologists, special educators. There's no silver bullet at this point. We know that earlier intervention, particularly as the brain is developing, we really capitalize on that neuroplasticity, is important. We have lots of evidence to suggest that our behaviorally based interventions, particularly if they're delivered in a developmentally appropriate way, are meaningful to children and can improve functioning. We are developing our evidence to suggest certain predictors, or I would even say sort of moderators of interventions. So for example, we know that the intervention outcomes are better for children who have language prior to the age of 5. We know that children who engage in some of these interventions who have perhaps intact cognitive abilities tend to do better in some of our social skills and social communication interventions. So these are factors that need to be considered, but essentially our tried and true kind of special education, developmental and behavioral communication interventions is sort of the best we've got. There are complementary and alternative treatments out there that have not received the type of investigation that our psychosocial and behavioral interventions have had. And I used to practice in a developmental pediatrics office, and getting our patients and the parents of our patients to sort of talk to us about the types of treatments that they were considering, develop the relationship with the family such that they can open up and say, hey, I'm sort of thinking about trying this alternative treatment or that alternative treatment. It was really important to us. Because if you think about it, we're going to throw everything at the wall and hope something sticks. And if you're like me, you want to do everything that you can for your son or daughter with a disability. And so you're going to try 7 things and hope that one works. The problem with that scientifically is we don't know which of those 7 is actually working. Is it some combination? Is it the interaction among those 7? Is it, really interventions 1 through 5 and 6 and 7 are harmful? So from a kind of a family or a parent perspective, I really get this, that you want to try everything as quickly as possible. But science and sort of the scientific investigation of these interventions does take a little bit of time. Really, the evidence-based interventions are developmental and behavioral and communication based at this point.
I want to touch on just one thing that you very briefly mentioned about, there's a wide variety of capacities of people with these disorders. So we have this concept of a savant, that maybe there's extraordinary abilities in some subset of people.
You're extraordinary, Patrick.
Oh, thank you. That's not what I'm
Is that
looking
what you're
for.
asking?
Yeah, no, that's not what I'm asking. But I'll take it.
Okay.
No, I'm asking, is this really an urban legend, or are there some people whose brains work a little bit differently and really have abilities that go beyond what we would call sort of average within the population?
There's absolutely those individual differences. And we see some extreme patterns in strength areas or savant or splinter skills in some capacity, be it sort of visual or memory or attention to detail, and huge gaps in other areas of functioning. And so that is a thing. It's not an urban legend. It certainly doesn't characterize the lion's share of people with autism spectrum disorder. Typically, there are peaks and valleys in strengths and weaknesses in individual skill sets. With intact cognitive ability or advanced cognitive ability, sort of genius or savant-like abilities, you often see areas of relative weakness. And so it's not sort of across the board strengths. It can be, magnified in one particular area and relative weaknesses in other areas. Again, the hallmarks of autism spectrum disorder are deficits in social communication skills. So it's a brain disorder with social communication deficits at its core. And so you can see some strengths in other areas, but certainly social communication would be sort of an underlying core symptom.
Mm-hmm. I just wonder if that gives us some insights into parts of our brain or mental capacity that maybe could be developed or could lead to more extraordinary insights in the future.
So there is a scientist in the UK, Simon Baron-Cohen, who studies the male brain, and he's actually written, it sounds funny, I'm probably 50% male in here, and you're probably thinking, yeah, we're pretty good. Male brain, it's awesome. The male brain...
the other 50% just said, well, yeah.
So. It's awesome. The other 50% is tuning me out right now. There are some clues. It doesn't necessarily speak to the mechanisms behind it, but there are some clues in sort of some patterns or some subgroup of kind of relative strengths and weaknesses. So sort of visual, rational thinking, very concrete. And if you think about social communication and some of the nuances and empathy and social skills and communication, sort of the antithesis to sort of rational and, lots of right angles. And I hope there's no engineers in the room that I'm offending. But there are some skills or some strength areas that are very developed in the so-called male brain. And I'm not endorsing this model, but it is something that is under investigation.
So I want to just start wrapping up and focus on two things that a number of people have contacted us about. One, I want to talk about the Spark just for a second. Because I think many people in the audience are here because they have loved ones that are involved. And so I think many people are motivated to sort of get involved in research projects, and Spark is one that sounds very exciting. Both with that and other things that are going on in your world and broadly, how do people get involved in these kinds of projects? Is there a way in?
Yes. So Spark is on social media. There's a Facebook page. I should have brought flyers. I don't have a Spark tattoo yet, but I'm planning on getting one, so I'll have the contact information available at all times. But in all honesty, you can Google or you can go on Facebook and you can look at Spark OHSU. This is a statewide collaboration, so I'm not switching teams at this point or anything.
We're all friends. We're all together here.
We're all together, and the night campus is bringing us even closer together.
That's exactly right.
So there's a very easy sign up online, and actually to sign up it's very easy. And I should have should have had a slide with that information, and I can get that, and we can potentially post it on the
Sure. Yeah, we can have a follow-up on
Night
that.
Campus. Yeah, but it's a very easy online sign-up process, and actually to get sort of your foot in the door and consent, it's easy. The protocol does involve some online surveys. It does not require any office visits or any campus visits. It's online, and there are collecting DNA. So they actually send you a kit in the mail where they'll collect saliva samples, and you ship it back. And it's a fairly straightforward process. In Oregon, we've recruited close to 3,000 participants, and we have complete data on about 500. And complete data means trios, it means DNA, it means some of the clinical indicators and all of the survey data. It's very important but arduous work, and it's difficult to recruit. However, we're hoping as a community of scholars and a community of sort of committed and interested folks in our autism community that we'll be able to reach our target goal. I don't know if we'll reach our national target goal, which is 50,000, but no matter what, it will be the largest study of autism spectrum disorder to date. And so will provide a lot of rich data for additional scientists to sort of data mine and pave the way for additional studies.
I suspect in 5 years we'll have you back, and this will revolutionize the way that we think about these problems. Although if it's true of everything else that we're doing in genetics and genomics, it'll just continue being very complex and lots to do.
Yeah.
The final thing that I want to follow up on is that you talked about interventions. We have both families, we have professionals that maybe would like to know. Does the University of Oregon have courses or anything like that? What are the resources in our community or more broadly to sort of help implement these research evidence-based approaches, and how do we get that out into the world?
Are you helping me with my recruitment and enrollment of graduate students in our College of Education?
Any of those things is good, but
I'll just, honestly, I had no idea what Patrick was going to ask me, so this sounds sort of really, the College of Education are
actually, this is from the audience, not even me.
But so our Department of Special Education is really nationally known in this area, and we're ranked number 3 in the country. We're very proud of our standing and our offerings in this area. We have a number of faculty, not just me, who focus on issues of autism and developmental disabilities. We have a master's program that prepares teachers, practitioners in early intervention and K-12. We focus on early intervention all the way through post-secondary transition. I think this is important because oftentimes a lot of the research does come out of the early intervention, the young children, but these kids grow up, they're in our schools, they graduate. So we offer master's and doctoral programs. We have an undergraduate minor in special education. We've got wonderful clinical opportunities in our HEDCO clinic and our new autism clinic, the HEDCO Autism Research and Training Clinic. And I think what's exciting for people in the community who are thinking about perhaps going back to school or pursuing some professional accreditation or professional credentials is that the University of Oregon, we're not just training practitioners, we're really training practitioners who have a deep appreciation for the evidence base that informs our practice. And it's why I moved to Oregon. I've been here for 9 years, and it's the College of Education and the multidisciplinary nature of our work, and certainly with the exciting advances in applied sciences, it's what's keeping me here. It's pretty exciting. So if anyone wants to dive, I don't know if our Dean, Randy Camphouse, is in the audience, but we'd be delighted to talk to folks about opportunities for their own training and professional development.
Great. Well, with that, I'd like us all to thank Laura Lee one more time. And again, thank you for coming out tonight. We'll wish you adieu, but Laura Lee, oh wow, this is like a real performance here. Awesome.
That's Batman, by the way.
don't want to point out I didn't get one of those after my talk. But I just want to thank you again, and just let you know that Laura Lee and I, will be out available at front for another 10 minutes or so if you have some questions that we didn't get to, and I didn't get to all of them. But I really appreciate the feedback that you provided during this conversation. So, good night, everyone.